Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the VOXOLOGY podcast. We are so delighted you are with us. Mike Erie here, Tim Stafford here, and our friend Suzie P. Lind. Suzie Lind is not her, well, that's her name, but Suzie P. Lind is that the middle initial there is a Seth Erie addition. And he only calls her
endearment. I like to call it an endearment.
Yes. Suzie P. Lind. And I don't know, it's always that whole thing. It's never just Suzie Lind. It's never just Suzie. It is Suzie P. Lind. And really in one syllable, he just sort of makes that happen. And it's outstanding. But Suzie, if you're new to the show, Suzie Lind is somebody I met 3 years ago when I moved to Nashville, Tennessee and started working for this church. Suzie is one of the elders and one of the pastors. She's the pastor over the staff. She's a pastor of spiritual formation. She's sort of, she kind of does a lot. And she's in seminary getting her master's in theology at Fuller Seminary. And so she's just a dynamo. And it has been so fun to bring her on the show every now and again, because she and I and our crew at this church have an incredible time talking about all the things, that are very similar to the topics that we talk about.
Yeah,
here.
this
So
morning
Suzie,
I sat down and made pancakes and watched you guys talk about Eve on YouTube.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, Tim, that's something for breakfast. All right.
Right.
So no one needs to go find that one. That's a very silly and fun display of what our church is like. But
well, thank you for having me.
Well, Suzie, thank you for taking time out. I know you're in seminars all day. And so we just caught her on her lunch break. And then Tim Stafford's got some news for us. First of all, have you heard anything about your gallbladder?
My ultrasound.
Do we have a gallbladder update?
My ultrasound was yesterday, so no.
Oh, okay. So Suzie, Tim just sort of in an offhanded way talked about some stomach pain. We got about 3,000 emails saying, check your gallbladder.
Oh my gosh.
And Tim did. He went to his doctor and said, hey, check it. And so they did an ultrasound yesterday.
So it was weird. We talked about in the episode, and then we did the recording, and then when I came back from the doctor on Monday morning, we already had emails. But I had just left the doctor and then got home and had all these emails like, do this. I emailed the doctor. I was like, hey, we just saw each other. However, I don't know how to phrase this, but a bunch of people that I don't know told me that I should do this.
Yeah.
It was perfect.
And we did. And we're going to check it. And in VOXOLOGY, if you guys hit this, we're going to come to you for everything. All right. I've got a slight fever and a scratchy throat. What do you think? And we're just going to crowdsource
that's going to put the whole podcast in a different category.
Absolutely. We're all of a sudden going to be
health and wellness.
Yes.
What was the old column that people would write into? Dear Annie or Dear Abby?
Yes.
We'd be like the opposite
Dear
of
Abby.
that. Like Abby is asking for help.
Yes. We are.
Dear listeners, help me.
Dear, And you also just came back from a writing, or what is a creative retreat?
A creative retreat.
Tell us about that. That was part of your therapy assignments, right?
I've had that assignment for a long time, but haven't been able to find time. So last week in therapy, we sat down and she kind of went back through we're trying to reattach my head and my heart, which are very, very detached. And so we've talked about a bunch on here, multiple reasons. So we talked through how to exist in that place when my anxiety spikes, or if I can't make my brain do this or that, and what to do. It was we had like an hour just on that. But I went to a house in Santa Cruz all by myself for a couple days, and I was supposed to lower my expectations all the way to the ground level. Just let it be what it is.
Key to life.
I brought a lot of stuff with me. But it was good. I did a lot of work. I don't know what you want to know. It was great and hard and fun. And then I got lonely and I went home.
Perfect. That sounds perfect.
You know
what was it?
There's certain movies I'll watch to kind of get my gears going, and they just inspire me in different ways. But one I hadn't watched in probably 15 or 20 years was What Dreams May Come. Do you remember that? It was a Richard Matheson novel. You guys, oh wow. It's a Robin Williams movie. They took some liberties with it, but basically everybody dies and he goes to heaven, but then his wife commits suicide and she goes somewhere else. And then he defies the rules of afterlife and goes to get her because they end up being soulmates. But it's like super heavy.
Oh, wow.
And has a lot of interesting spiritual provocations. But everybody dies in that movie. So I was sitting there in this house by myself on the last morning, and I was like, okay. Well, the whole movie's about death, so it's not too much of a spoiler. Everyone dies in the first couple minutes.
And that's inspiring for you?
No, that's not one I normally go to, but that's what inspired me to go home. I was sitting there.
So it was inspiring.
I was like, I gotta get out of here.
All right, so we did a 2-day writer's retreat.
Yeah.
And it was good. What was the hardest, besides the homesickness after the movie? What was the hardest part of it?
Well, part of my assignment was that I could not use my cell phone at all. So no social media, no texting, no email, no anything. So that was away from me. And my wife was like, I will use the Find My iPhone app to beep if there's an emergency. So you'll hear that. Otherwise, just stay away from it. So that was actually easier than I thought it was going to be. Sitting down and trying to force creativity is never productive. It's really, really hard to do. So I have different tactics that I use for that, but I got some work done.
Nice. But the bigger deal for your therapist was just doing it.
Just doing it. And, we've talked on here a little bit about that. The head and the heart thing's a big thing. And, being kind of boxed by different people my whole life, being told as like an extreme 4 with a very, very extreme 5 wing. I've been told what I am and what I'm not supposed to do my entire life. And so she's like, we have to rectify 40 something years of people boxing you in and telling you not to lean into the things that are part of your true self. And so that's hard because I've been working against that for so long, but it's also exciting because she's like, you need to kind of cut loose. I was like, okay. And my wife's sitting there next to me. So I was like, all right, you heard her. She's the therapist. She said, this is my year.
It's cut loose.
That's right.
I love it. Well, proud of you, dude.
Yeah.
And that's awesome.
Yep. And we expect great things.
Oh, there's some great things. I got a lot of work done on my novel, but I've got Shane Claiborne's Common Prayer book. And it's a liturgy kind of, it's amazing. So I had that and I hadn't opened it until then. But it provoked a lot of good questions too.
Great.
A lot of poetry.
That's awesome.
Speaking of poetry, somebody wrote in this episode. I mean, let me just frame this thing. We did a parenting answer to a question, I don't know, a couple episodes ago, maybe. And it came out kind of raw for me anyway. And the amount of response we've gotten has been off the charts. And then the kind of responses we've gotten. There are some folks who are just the emails that are outlining the fruit of that sort of bad approach and how harmful it's been and how disconnected people are from their kids. I mean, heartbreaking. And we got a bunch of follow-up questions. And so we thought, okay, well, let's take a bit of time to respond to that. And then among those, we had somebody write in about that parenting issue, but he has this line. He says, he was describing our podcast and he said, it's like listening to a podcast with Tigger and Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh.
Let you guess.
It's like having, well, yeah, he didn't specify, so I wasn't sure. It's like having this bouncy, playful dude run circles around this calm, soothing, mellow counterpart. I totally love it. And I was like, there it is. So I think you're the bouncy one, Stafford.
Obviously.
And I'm the soothing presence.
That's right.
And then this isn't a parenting question, but I wanted to talk to it briefly because we were talking about pastors kind of being unavailable to people. I don't know what episode it was. Strange Religion, I think we talked about it. With limited access was the Nije comment, and how that sort of looks, today. I love the podcast this week on Strange Religion. Mike, you mentioned that you were a pastor at a large church in SoCal and you had assistants that people had to go through in order to get to you. Our family attended the church you pastored in Mission Viejo. We were new to the church. We wanted to get to know you personally. I knew as a daughter of a pastor how lonely and isolating being a pastor can be. I remember inviting you and your family over for dinner. You told us to get a hold of your assistant. I knew that that was a nice way to say, not a chance. You made it clear through that reply that you were not available. My thought was you were not in a healthy place personally, and we kept coming to church, loved your biblical teaching. How have you personally changed? What did you learn from that time forward? And have you become more open? So I thought that was a great question. And before we dive into the parenting thing, just to acknowledge, so I wrote her back and I said, man, I'm sorry I bailed on dinner. I'm sure it would have been wonderful. One of the things that's changed is, and for those of you that don't know, I was immersed in Southern California megachurch land as a pastor, teaching pastor, senior pastor for about 20 years. And part of that whole package is a great deal of externally induced and self-induced anxiety and pressure. And I just didn't realize how bad it was when you're doing multiple services. And, you feel like in that model, you feel like the kind of sermon is the reason people show up. So it's got to be great and blah, 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 blah. And I'm a performer by nature. And so, but I'm also an introvert. I'm incredibly introverted. What it costs me on a weekend to do multiple services, I have to hide. And so part of what's changed is I don't feel all that pressure anymore. Like I've just gotten healthier and I understand my role in the church much, much better. And the other thing is we don't have, in our little community, we don't have any gatekeepers. It's like, we don't have assistants. You just sort of,
we don't.
No, you just sort of show up and you can come say hi. And part of the reason I would also do that is I was so overwhelmed with the number of people who'd want to meet with me that I tried to see who were the ones that really wanted to, by giving an extra couple of steps in that scenario. So I would get invited to meals all the time and I just couldn't say yes to all of it. And so I would want to introduce a couple of steps to see who were the people that were really interested in this and who were the people that were just saying, yeah, it'd be great. When somebody says, hey, I'd love to pick your brain, I don't know what that means. And I'm not always sure that's a great use of time. And so, I never just say yes to that. Even today, I just want to say, well, what do you want to talk about? Or, I'd love to hear more about that or whatever. But what's changed, I've become somebody who is way more comfortable with my limits and way more direct in my speech. The second thing is our church, the way we do church is so much less pressure and focus on excellence. And so I have relational energy outside of service time. And then I think I've just gotten healthier, personally over the course of those years, and hallelujah. So I just want to acknowledge that.
Do you think?
Yeah.
Do you think that being that way, being like aware of your limits more, has made you actually more open to those
Yes.
that you're around?
Yep, absolutely. And realizing, like we talked about before, the opposite of shame is connection. And so when I lived in mega church pastor land, I was very disconnected from a group of people who weren't vocationally aligned with me. I just, especially if you're a senior kind of leader in a large organization, you just can't be, friends with everybody. And so and again, these are all things that I learned in mega churchville that I've had to unlearn. Some of them were survival mechanisms for sure, but I think some of the things, I just thought that's kind of the way it was. And that's just how you had to do it. When you're the centerpiece of a 2,000 person church, there's going to be extra pressure on that, which is an awful thing to even believe about yourself or the church. So
it's so interesting though. I wonder if you would be here and if you would be as healthy as you are now, if you had not gone through all that, like the podcast has been, I think, helpful. It's been helpful for me. How about if I just say that? So
on me, yeah.
It's not, and I am assuming it's been helpful for some other people. And it's weird to think that it may not have existed because it's in some ways was like like a healthy place for you to go to after all that. So it's,
Totally.
people always ask me questions about regret. I'm like, I don't have any regrets in my life. There's things I would have probably done differently had I had the
Yeah.
knowledge now that, you know, if I had the knowledge then that I have now, but I don't regret, I'll just try to make better decisions in the future.
Yeah.
But I always think that's interesting
No,
how much we can grow and learn from, or where it brings you, where the roads bring you is always interesting.
absolutely. And there were parts of me that loved that. Like I said, my role in my family was performer, and that's where I'm most comfortable. So of course I would choose a profession and have God's stamp of approval on, when I'm performing well. And so, I was conspiring with all of that. But that model and mode of leadership, of church, of sermon focus, that whole thing is, I think, really unhealthy and not great for anybody involved in it. And so it doesn't mean you can't be well known or well respected, but there are dynamics that creates that you have to purposefully resist and counter.
Yeah.
And I wasn't aware of how corrosive, at least for someone with my personality, all of that can be. So Susie's been a great partner in, because John Mark Comer, who we had on a month ago or two, he had this great line. He said, "You have to go back to what wounded you, but you have to do it differently with new people."
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd always thought, I'm done pastoring. I'm done with this whole thing. But I was open to, because of what he was saying, I was open to going back. And then you come across a whole crew of people who lived in megachurch land and have all committed together that we're not going to prioritize that way. We're not going to prioritize those values. It's just been great. So anyway, I just thought it was a great question. And I was like, yeah, I think that's worthy of talking about, because I do have some regrets. I want to be more like you in that, Timothy.
Me too.
Yeah, I really wish I would have done some things differently and
over.
have been healthier. Yeah, that's where your mellow, smooth jazz presence.
That's right. I'm just like Chapstick.
You're like I was just gonna say you're like Chapstick for my heart. I was literally gonna say you're Chapstick for my heart.
That might be the title of the episode.
You're Burt's Bees.
Suzie, how do you navigate that? Because you have a calming presence, and I think people are probably always begging for time. How do you navigate that?
That's a very good question. I mean, part of the seminar that I'm in today is talking about how you only have space for a total of 150 relationships that include like your intimate relationships and then people that you're acquainted
I think
with.
I only have a third of that.
And yeah, I mean, you would think it's much less, but when you think about it, most people do have that many people in their lives, and they think they might be deep and well connected from the heart level to a lot of those people that they're actually not. Like, you can only go to a certain depth with, I guess. But for me, it's been kind of similar. Well, not similar to Mike, because I was opposite in that I said yes to everything because I thought that was what I should do. And, I think for me, recognizing that there are people that I can spend a lot of time with, people that I can be real vulnerable with, and people that I can just be kind with, and I can be hospitable with. And being hospitable and kind doesn't always mean you have access to my total inner part of who I am. And so I think for me, it's come with like a lot of emotional work and learning about who I am and what I need. And then, I am so prone to codependency. And so, kind of understanding that and doing the lifelong work against that. And, but I think the biggest thing for me in the last couple of years has been recognizing that I can say no, and I can say no kindly and without hurting somebody. And that's actually, it just feels really amazing when I can do that, and it's kind to that person because I'm not setting them up for disappointment.
Right. You don't feel guilty about.
So
that's good.
You don't feel the guilt of like being able to say, I don't have, or whatever, like that goes along with that kind of kind
Yeah.
note. Yeah, I think that's always like the extra thing that hangs on the back of it is the guilt, the shame, that, which is also stuff I'm working on in therapy. False guilt and shame.
Yeah.
Oh, bro.
Yeah.
Totally. And speaking of false guilt and shame,
It's my new band.
so yeah, exactly. Yes. Oh, that's funny. I wanted to. One of the reasons. I mean, Suzie and I, we talk a lot about parenting together. Our whole little crew does, and I have so much respect for Suzie as a parent. But you've experienced some of the downsides because as we've talked, you've been really gracious to sort of share your journey as a Christian parent. And I was thinking one of the questions we're getting a lot is, how do I repair with my adult children? I mean, we've gotten several emails from folks who have adult children who no longer talk to them, who have so left the church and hate Christianity. These parents are not welcome in their kids' lives, and they're left.
That's so hard.
I mean, I can't. They're yep. How do you repair that? So I was wondering if you'd share just a little bit of your, however much or little you want to, a little bit of your story. You have 4 boys, and we've got one in middle school and one who's out of college, and 2 in at college. I mean, it's a broad spectrum.
Yeah.
And you've learned and grown a lot yourself. And so, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to hear a bit of your story with the end goal of how do you repair?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I also want to be more like Tim Stafford in that I like regret is a companion for me. I have a lot of regret, and I would love to go back and do a lot of things differently. But it's interesting because it dawned on me recently that those things that I think I would do differently present themselves in different ways now as my children are older, and I'm still doing the thing that I hated.
Oh, wow.
So really the problem is with, it's my work to do. But I mean, the story, I'll try to make it brief, is I did not grow up in a Christian home. I became a Christian pretty much in high school. I started following Jesus. And in that time, I was around a lot of Christian families. I mean, that's why I came to Jesus, because I always say the people of God are the ones who brought me to Jesus. And so I would be around these families that I love and have so much respect for. And I wanted to do that. Like I was taking notes already in high school about what I wanted to do and what I didn't want to do as a parent. But by the time I became a parent, and I also, I heard you say on that podcast a couple of weeks ago that I thought my one goal was to have my kids be saved, right? Yep. That they would become disciples of Christ. And that was really a big part of the parenting for me. And so in the faith community that I was a part of, I looked to the people who had big and good families that I thought were good families at the time. And a lot of them homeschooled, and, they had, obedience was like a big thing, and it was the Growing Kids God's Way time, which I never did the Growing Kids God's Way classes, but I did have the Baby Wise book, and there were certain things about it, the routines, the discipline, the sleep training, and all that stuff that I thought was the thing that I needed to do to have my kids, be able to soothe themselves, is what the saying was. Yeah. And so I often say, now that we have all these documentaries coming out, like the I Kissed Dating Goodbye documentary and all that, I'm like, where's the documentary on the Growing Kids God's Way?
Yes.
Because that's the one we need next.
Totally.
So yeah, I think I prioritized obedience and I prioritized independence. And I thought by doing those things that it would foster connection, whereas I should have, and going back, would have started with connection. And even in in quote unquote discipling my kids, there's a woman, she's a pastor and an author, and she has a really great Instagram presence. Her name is Meredith Ann Miller. And I follow her, and she sort of teaches people how to talk about Jesus and how to talk about the Bible with kids. And she does it in such a insightful, thoughtful way. And her philosophy is that when kids are little, you don't teach them. Your whole goal is to impart wonder in them and love for Jesus, and to know that they are loved, and not the rules and the way of living and the crazy stories that when they're presented in kids' Bibles make the like David is the hero in the David and Goliath story, like it's God is the hero. And so you kind of train your kids at an early age in that they're loved and they're welcomed no matter what. So I'm trying to redo those conversations now with my adult children, because like you, Mike, the jury's out. And, if I'm going to be judged on Christian fidelity, I'm probably not doing great. However, when you talk about repair, I think I did learn just in time that the beauty is in the repair, that the power is in the repair. And I actually heard a therapist friend of mine say to me one time, and Andi Kolber says this in her book, Try Softer also, that even in the wounding and in the trauma, if you're able to be available for the repair and you're willing to go through the process of repair, that healing can be more powerful than what the power of that wound or trauma has.
That's great.
On a person.
That's hopeful.
And so, but being available for the repair requires, it might require that you spend a lot of money on therapy, and it might require on you and your children. It might require that you have to humble yourself and go, not just go say, I'm sorry for, but hey, what was it like for you when I did this when you were little? And how do you think that's made you the person that you are? And what would you have done differently? And then be willing to hear their hurt and how they experienced you, and, be able to do that and ask for forgiveness from that place of wanting repair and wanting connection. And so that's a process, like I have, especially with my two older kids, it's been a process over the last few years. And the one thing I always say to them is, when you have something against me, when you remember something or you feel something and you feel kind of anger or bitterness even towards me as a parent, would you please give me the opportunity to repair it? And I want to be available for the repair, because we all, as we get older, recognize who our parents are and what their human shortcomings are. But to say, I want to be available for the repair has been really important. And then not expecting them to be someplace where they're not.
That's
like
so
you always
good.
say, Mike, I love this. You always say, we're here for the long play. So I'm not looking for outcomes today. I'm not looking for, certain markers that I was taught to look for. But I'm trusting that Jesus, who is the author and perfecter of my faith, is also the author and perfecter of their faith. And I just have to be available for however the Holy Spirit wants to do that.
Suzie, that
was a lot.
No, that was a lot of incredible. And you added something there that I think is so, so important. We're not repairing for the sake of them becoming Christian. We're repairing for the sake of connection. And that's the hardest thing. So much of, as I've thought about my parenting, or so much of why growing kids God's way, or just, finding some formula, why that's attractive is because we're afraid for our kids. We've been told that if they don't believe in Jesus, they burn in hell and are separated from him forever. And so can you imagine a more harmful scenario than you as a Christ follower seeing your kids burn in hell forever? And so the pressure is immense to make them pray the prayer, get baptized, act Christianly, even if they don't love Jesus. They just know pretending gets rewarded from you. And so to not focus on that outcome, but instead just simply allow them to connect with your authentic self, with their authentic self. And as part of your authentic self, you love Jesus, and they can see that. But you're connecting with them regardless of whether or not they're coming to those same conclusions. Man, I think that is so powerful. So it's not outcome-based apology. It's just the simple human connection of, man, I was learning and growing too, and I'm so sorry. I've often asked my kids.
Yeah,
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, you.
Well, it's just naming those things,
Yeah.
I mean, like when my kids were little, I was going through all that. I was dealing with my own trauma that I've experienced with my parents, and I was dealing with my own stuff, my own anger, my own, so I was a very angry mom when they were little, and I yelled a lot. And it was because I had all this wounding in me that I hadn't properly dealt with. And so being able to say that to them and name that, and even say, like, I had no idea what I was doing with you, my firstborn son. Like, I thought I knew, but I really didn't know. And, he calls himself the sacrifice sometimes because he's the first, and I learned so much by parenting him. But really, like, I can name all the ways I've wounded all of my kids. So, but being able to name that has been, I think, helpful for the relationship, and then really loving them where they are in their life, and where, they don't believe the same way I do yet about things. And they make decisions that I may not make for them, but I still want to be involved in their life and be available for them if they get hurt. And,
that's interesting. One of the questions I wrote down a whole list of questions in the middle of the night when I was on this little creative retreat. But one of the questions I wrote down is, what is my limp? Who knows of it? How do I hide it? And why do I hide it? So I'm trying to
that's good.
Have that as exposed as possible right now. Cause I was talking to Mike, I was joking. I was like, we were thinking about all the people that are associated with this podcast and how it's such a broken group of individuals and how wonderful that is, and how lucky we are that people have all the brokenness that we have is pretty exposed at this point. So it's just this like ragtag group of broken misfits on a boat trying to figure out how to sail through this stuff, which is kind of, it's encouraging to me. But I have a question, if I can ask it, based on the thing about wonder. Because I was reading an article about these new books that are coming out or have come out, and they're called like Fat Cat or something like that. And it's these people who are writing books on catechism for kids. And it's kind of focused on things like the Lord's Prayer. I think the article said 10 Commandments and the Apostles' Creed. And they're just like, it's so important that kids know this stuff and and it's this whole long thing. But I was like, is it at that point? Like, because what you just said about wonder, I think is kind of more where I'm at, where it's like, I want their curiosity and that kind of stuff to just be like ignited. And to feel that wonder, whereas, we grew up in the time period of so much felt bored, memorized the things that I didn't have that wonder, or I had the wonder, but sometimes it felt wrong, or it felt misplaced. And I still have that hot cold. That's one of the things in therapy that she keeps getting at, is like, she's like, good Lord, you have so much trauma from the evangelical culture. It's unreal. And she's like, there's just so much to sort through. And so my kids are much younger than your guys' kids, but they have not been I could probably count how many times they've been in church in their lives so far. It's a low number.
Yeah, we'll just call that fail.
I got an F so far, and I'm looking to bring that curve up a little bit. But
it's not Fat Cat, it's Skinny Cat for you.
Or it's just like Dead Cat. There's a hot coal in the back of me that still kind of burns with like being worried about, subconsciously worried, like I'm damning my children to hell. They're blah, 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 blah.
Sure.
Blah. Whereas most of my intellect doesn't think that way anymore. There's still that hot coal in the background that burns.
Dude.
So what do you guys think about that idea? Like this movement that because I do agree that we don't treat kids with the amount of wisdom and intellect that they do have. Like, we kind of dumb things down for them sometimes in ways that they don't need. I think a lot of times kids are much smarter and intuitive than we give them credit for.
Amen.
And my two kids, as we talked about, are so dramatically different from each other that one approach wouldn't work. It would be foolish to try to approach them both the same way. But this idea of the kids need to know certain things or inviting them into wonder, like, what do you guys think about that?
Go ahead, Suze, if you got thoughts.
Well, I think, there's a way to teach some of that stuff with wonder. Right. It's that's how you teach it and how you go about it. I mean, like, when we think about, like, we recite the Shema a lot because of Seth Erie. But when you go back to Deuteronomy and you read where that lands in Deuteronomy, it's, as you're walking, as you're talking, posted on the doorway of your house. Like, it's as you're doing life, you're sharing these things that are true, that we find in Scripture. So, I actually had this conversation with our kids pastor the other day because we were talking about the whole idea of Scripture memorization. And I actually love Scripture memorization as long as the kid, it's age appropriate and they understand what it is that they're memorizing and what that means in the story of God. And I'm not against any of that stuff. I think it's good to teach some of that stuff, but it's how you teach it and when you teach it. And, like I was told, when I spank, that I should share these scriptures. And, like, that's abusive.
Wow.
I didn't do that, thank God.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah, I didn't do that. But I know so many people who feel like they were beat over the head with the Bible.
Yeah. And
that's not that. I mean, God gave us his word for life, and that's not life-giving. And Tim, I think you're right. Like, I've always thought, like, that scripture to train up a child in the way that they should go, it's in the way that they should go. Like, what one kid needs is different than the other kid. I mean, I have one kid that talks and tells me everything, and I have 3 that keep everything inside. And I have, one that is his love language is quality time, and the other one, it's words of affirmation. And so I have to find the way to each of their hearts through connection. And they know what I believe, and they know what I think about all the things. I don't need to tell them all the time, especially as they're older. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I know things are different when they're younger, but I do think that you can teach those things in an age appropriate way that does make it wonderful,
I think I want to jump on that, Suzie, because and you can also teach those things in a way that squelches wonder,
right?
And squelches curiosity, and we almost have, or at least I've seen, we sort of think these texts have magical properties. So Absolutely. If we just bring the 10 Commandments in schools, they magically do something, even if they're ripped out of context. I had a friend who would just read the Bible over his infants and be like, I don't know what this does, but it'll do something. and maybe it does. I mean, I'm not opposed to, being open to that, but I just think, catechizing our kids towards knowledge is very, very different than catechizing our kids towards connection with God. And so back to what Suzie's saying, it's like adult discipleship too. It's the same thing we do with adults. If they just learn the right information, then that's what it is to be Christian. And you realize, boy, that's the very tip of the iceberg. And so if our goal of catechism is somebody who prays a secret prayer in their secret heart and, then divorces their real life from the rest of that prayer, man, I couldn't be more opposed. I think we're doing harm by teaching kids that way. If by catechism you mean the way real humans get formed into people of character, then I'm in. And that includes the emotional, physical, mental, spiritual part of that, then yeah, I could see huge help for this stuff. But as Suzie was saying, how it's done matters more than what it is almost. And so I think that I'm all for forming our kids. That is a responsibility, absolutely, that we see throughout the text, but we also just instinctively know as humans. But the way the Bible gets used in the formation of our kids is what's so harmful. That's where I think we really do some damage. And it's because we've been malformed by how we see the Bible. If it's just, we don't want wisdom, we want clarity. And because, and clarity alleviates fear, because we all have that burning coal in the back of our neck saying, man, we could really screw our kids up here. And so, yeah, I want to deal with the fear that sits behind a lot of our parenting because that's what God's had to do with me. I mean, it is the long game. I mean, if they're alive for 60, 70, 80 years, then my being connected to them over the course of that trajectory is more important than how well they're behaving at this moment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, well, and there's a reason why a lot of young adults at this point want nothing to do with the church and want nothing to do with Christianity, because of all the Christians behaving badly that they've witnessed in the last few years.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, my kids have experienced church trauma already twice. And, you know, not to mention all the things that they see out there in the world with, you know, all the things that we've experienced the last few years.
Yeah.
So they don't want to be a part of that. So and all of that has wrapped itself around scripture and catechisms and things like that. And so if it's not it's got to shape their lives towards Christlikeness if it's what you want it to be. And what does that look like?
Exactly.
You know, I mean,
exactly.
It's just,
that's the big question.
It's not a formula.
Well, you grow, you have that fear of the burning coal fear that, you know, I'm not doing this right. Am I damning my own children? Right. So there's that we grew up with, but the fear on the other side is exactly that. You don't want to set them up on the same path that led us to so much spiritual trauma that we're trying to unpack. And so many of my friends are not making it through. Like, they're just like, forget, this is not worth it. So it's like, you have that, it's like a double-edged sword that you're worried about on both sides. Like, well, I don't want to go too far this way. I don't want to go too far. It's kind of like a political conversation, right? We keep trying to put it into these two binaries, and it may be a completely third conversation rather than trying to pick your poison. Which way would you like to die?
Yeah. Yeah. We got a question in, and Suzie, I know you got to go back to your seminar. So whenever you need to go, just interrupt and say, I've got to go. You are blessed.
Okay, I'm good.
You're blessed and you're going. But we got a response from the original emailer about the parenting. He said, I had to respond to the podcast where you addressed my question because, ironically, growing kids God's way is the material they were teaching. So it's still out there. I listened twice to the episode, actually trying to absorb. There were lots of things that were helpful. But in the end of it, I did feel myself floundering a bit, mostly just because it felt like the way I was parented was broken down and I'm not sure how to build it up. Or excuse me, mostly just because the way I parent was broken down and I'm not sure how to build it up. I know as a dad, I am so selfish. I'm very easily concerned with what my kids' actions say about me. And I feel the pressure to make sure they are obedient. Totally, man. Again, but that's fear. I'm also a bit of a perfectionist. How do I practice selflessness and humility with my kids while also being authoritative? Ooh, what a great question. And he said, for context, that's juicy. And for context, my kids are all quite young. We have 3 kids, all 4 and under, and a baby due in September. So, bro, you are in the catastrophe phase of parenting.
Yeah.
He said, what?
Survival.
Yeah, seriously. He said, am I at a stage where coercive control, I think is how you put it, is still necessary? Appreciate your attitude, guys. I'm the kind of person who wants the answers handed to them. And so the fact that you don't or won't give them is actually really helpful. Well,
or don't or won't have
and it may be because we don't have them. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's the quest for the formula, I think, that's, at the heart of this too.
Yeah.
But how do we, I want to start to answer that question. And then Suzie and Tim, I want you to react to what I'm saying and see if you agree or disagree. How do I be selfless and humble while still being authoritative? Because I think there is something in the Bible to the idea that we are all under authority and have to learn how to live under authority. We're not just our own. Contrary to American individualism, we belong to each other. And so the first and most important place you learn that dynamic is in the family. Now, we often use shame to teach that, right? I mean, what are you doing? Like, my kids would never do that. Like, who are you? Like, I mean, like that sort of shaming to keep kids in line.
Yeah.
But when I think about authority, so I only, as an American evangelical, I only hear authority in terms of power. And so authority means I have power to make you do what you want. But when you look at the authority that Jesus exercised, he did have coercive authority, but he only exercised it over the demonic, interestingly enough. And turning over tables doesn't count. He was making a symbolic, he was enacting a parable. He harmed nobody or nothing in that. So, okay, if you want to throw a symbolic tantrum in your household, you can, and call that Jesus following. That's fine. That's, but that's, you run the risk of just it being a tantrum and not symbolic at all. But I realized as I've grown older, there are different kinds of authority. One obviously is coercive. I can exercise coercive power. And so I can be an authority physically imposing over somebody else. But there's also like the manipulation. Have you been around somebody who's very manipulative? That's a form of power that people have. I can bribe you, reward you, threaten you. We often use this in conflict styles. But they're also there's the power of example. When I'm around a healthy family, I automatically want to emulate the dynamics that I'm seeing. Or if I'm around somebody who really knows nutrition, well, that's a slightly different one. So the power of example would be like a healthy family, or like somebody who goes to CrossFit and is like super cut. And I'm like, ooh, they're not pushing anything. They're just like
they're pushing weights.
They are pushing weights. Exactly. But they have something I would want. It's simply the power of example. But there's also the power of wisdom and expertise. Like when something's wrong with my car, I give authority to the person that says they can fix it. Not because they have coercive power over me or they're Machiavellian, although they could be, but rather because they have expertise that I would value that I don't myself have. And I think there are other examples, but the point is, how did Jesus exercise authority? And what percentage of it was coercive, tiny, versus how much of it was, authority through example, authority through influence, authority through knowledge, authority through his manner of life beyond just the physical example, but the fact that his teaching and life were so aligned with each other. And so to answer the emailer, I think there are ways to demonstrate authority that don't have to be coercive for you to still be authoritative. Would you guys agree with that?
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think about when my kids were really little, and the line that was fed to me that if they don't recognize your authority, they won't recognize the authority of God. Or if you have to teach them to obey so that they will obey God. And that's not the image of God that I want them to have. I mean, a little bit, but that's not the complete image of God.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah. But that's the gospel of sin management that we all got. That what God's goal for us is, and this is where we have a version of the gospel that makes this kind of parenting easy. The version of the gospel is that, well, how does God treat us? Well, he treats us as sinners in need of correction. Right. And the goal of Jesus following is to get us to heaven, number one, and then to stop sinning, number two. So if you believe that's how God treats us, it's very easy to then turn that into parenting and say, well, then the goal of them is to get them to believe this thing in their heart and to stop sinning. So we're into sin management is as adult disciples, but also as parents leading children in that same gospel. So as we've been exploring over and over about the full humanness that Jesus wants to restore, what does that look like then in parenting styles?
Well, that's interesting. The idea that you just said of like the belief in the heart, like if that's we're shaming or we're whatever to get to that point of this belief in the heart. But it's like belief isn't even the right word in that case, because then it's like, it's what, that they submit, right? They're not choosing.
Well, they learn to separate. They learn to separate their interior life from their exterior life.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just moralism. It's,
well, I wonder if
I
it's
know
authority through, you did a whole list.
Behavior modification.
Yeah. You did a whole list of authority through this. And I wonder if one of them is, because I was thinking about, this is one of the questions I wrote in the middle of the night too, was of talking about how much of that authority was invitation, and how that invitation evolved, because it was different in all these really different situations with different people. Like, so
that's right.
For me, parenting has been turning into, like, and this is so cliched, but patience has become the number one key focus. If I can keep myself calm and patient, I can navigate almost anything with my kids. But it's when I give up, I go immediately into the angry authoritative thing that does nothing but cause my children to recede, and that both of them recede differently. One,
but what drives you to that? Oh yeah.
But the other thing though, Tim, is when you're calm and patient, what you're doing is creating a safe environment. When you're calm and patient, they know that they're safe. And if a child knows that they're loved and that they're safe, they will listen to you.
Which is really hard when you are a high anxiety person. Like, this was this morning today. My older kid out of the house before he needed to be, got himself up, did everything, just easy peasy. The other one, we had a back and forth today. And I drive other kids to school, and I get very anxious about time. And so I get really kind of like agitated when she's taking too much time, and she'll lean into the agitation and go slower, which, but then you're involved in a pissing match with the child that, like, it's not, you're not going to win. No one wins. It's just, she feels ostracized. I feel guilty. And so that doesn't work. Right. So this idea of, like, you create that same space, that safe space, calm. She needs that calm. She's needed it since she was an infant. And so I have to approach that so very differently, but I have to invite her in with questions. I have to invite her in with asking further and further things when she's in an emotional tailspin. I have to listen to it and then ask questions into it to try to, and that's only when she's at 8 years old. This is 16.
But that's what you're talking about though, is attunement. It's seeing her, it's hearing her, it's knowing her. It's like, it's giving space for who she is, and then attuning to her, and then parenting her. Whereas when my kids were little, I didn't even know what that was. I was focused on the outcome.
That's right.
I have to get you to sleep through the night. I have to get you to be able to go to school on your own. I have to get you to not be afraid because Jesus is in your heart. Like, I mean, so dumb. But what you're doing, Tim, is you're attuning to your daughter. And that's, I mean, that, again, it's the long play. She may not always listen to you right away, but I mean, it's producing something in her that's compelling for her to draw near to you and to trust you and to trust what you're saying to her.
So let's talk about those scenarios where you do have to adjust their behavior, because that's not, so let's get very practical.
And that's the underlying of the initial question was.
Yes. Yeah. So great. Yeah. All right. So I'm attuning, and they still have to freaking get out the door by, 7:05 or we're late.
Yeah.
And they drive me crazy. And there are times I raise my voice, and I want to say we're allowed to show up as full humans too. And that's the scariest part, is bringing our full selves. And that's what Suzie's point about repair. Seth Erie remembers every time I've raised my voice at him. So he'll sing songs about daddy yelling. And because there was one time he threw a fit. He was young. He was in the restaurant. He was overstimulated. He starts throwing food, like batting all the plates off the table and hitting his mom. And I grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and I dragged him out of that restaurant. We went into the van and we had a very intense conversation. And by conversation, I mean, I was yelling at him. Yeah. And so there are times when you have to modify behavior, but I read something once and I don't remember. It was, I think it was a book called Parenting with Love and Logic or something, but just check this out. This worked so well. But but it was not angry parenting, not angry behavior modification, but it was like, so Nate wouldn't, mama packed Nate's lunch, but Nate would never take his lunch out of his lunchbox when he got home from school and put it in the sink and clean it out. So mama was always dealing with just, yucky dishes. And so one night at dinner, I just said, and this, again, you should all know how bad I am at all this, but from this book, I realized, they're communicating something to you through their behavior. And so I said to Nate, okay, Nate, your behavior communicates to me that you don't honor your mom's packing your lunch and that you would rather pack your lunch yourself. And so why don't we just have you pack your lunch and do the dishes afterwards? And mom just won't do that anymore. And it was so, like the light that went on, and again, he was older than Seth was, but there was this like behavior modification thing that I learned that was like, so much of what we hate about what our kids do and the way they make us react is they take advantage or they push or they find our weakness and they really zero in on or whatever. And there was just this great line. And they also said, you don't have to give consequences right away. That was something that was totally liberating for me. They're like, think about some sort of devious consequence that you can deliver from a very calm, non-anxious place. Yeah. And so for Nate, mama would get really angry with him. And that wasn't changing the behavior at all. But hey, Nate, why don't you go ahead and just start packing your lunch and then doing the dishes afterwards so that you have a new dish for tomorrow. That changed the behavior so quickly and so dramatically. Now that only works for a small window of age because they do get autonomous and at some point they'll say, well, I don't care. Right. Then fine, right. I won't eat, whatever. But that was something I learned that you can give consequences later. That was really powerful for me. So like our kids, I would ask them to do something, they would say no. And I wouldn't get upset. I wouldn't get mad, but I would wait until they asked me to do something. And I would say, man, that's so great. I love that we have in our relationship the permission to say no to each other. So I'm going to say no. And it was money. It was so great for a season of their childhood and my parenthood. Like there was just this like give and take that was really great. That didn't come from authority, but it did. And it won't work with every kid. But it did modify behavior. I wanted to give a specific example for the sake of this.
Well, I think that's really interesting because the idea of, so you're saying show up with your full self, and even the idea of being authoritative, we have such a specific understanding of what authority means. And it is kind of a power over structure. We do see authority as
that's right.
a fist. It's strong and it's whatever. Can we redefine authority? So that what I'm doing that's authoritative sometimes is calm and just things that we don't normally associate with that. Or I think about Jesus. How was Jesus authoritative all the way through, though? Even at the end, how did he exert authority in the end? And it's like, that's not necessarily how we interact with other people or how we show up fully.
Totally. Let me say one more thing about your scenario. And I don't know, this is something I would try. And again, I hate giving any of this from like, but I was thinking about it like, so here's your daughter and she deliberately slows down whenever you're on her. And so I would say, hey daughter, man, I love you and I think you're great. And I love, getting ready in the morning and your behavior is telling me you need more time. So why don't we get up half an hour earlier so that you can make sure you have time to be ready? Now, I don't know if that would work or not, but but what that would do for me is get me out of the angry stage.
Oh, for sure.
Because my goal is to survive the angry stage and to not parent
from that place
in the angry stage.
Yeah, yes, totally.
And so if you've done that, then great. I mean, I'm not saying that would work. I'm just saying that mode of parenting snaps me out of reacting.
I think that's it. I think it's not, there is no answer. So that worked for a little bit until the problem changed. And then, but then you still have to operate from that place of like, if that makes sense, like to try to reconstruct the scenario so that it's not just a tit for tat, but let's look at this 3-dimensionally and see the other ways through it and invite her into that. Has been helpful.
Suzie, thoughts? I can see it.
And see, what I was taught when I was a young mom was that you needed to have immediate obedience.
That's right.
And so that didn't give me the chance to cool my
Right.
head and to check in with myself and to be able to practice some patience and to step away and see, okay, how can I make this more compelling? How can I, what's the best way to teach my child what they need to know in this scenario?
Yeah.
So I think that right there is money. I mean, when people ask me, like, what's your, like, someone's pregnant for the first time or whatever, and they're like, what's your number one parenting advice? And it's always work on yourself.
Oh,
Go work on yourself.
yeah.
Forever.
Because if you go work on yourself, then if you're attuned to yourself, then you can attune to your child.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't know, every kid is different. And you do have life-threatening situations that you have to snap them out of sometimes. And you do have, you know, ongoing behaviors that you have to help them change. But every kid is different. And even if I tell you how to do that right now, it may not work for your child, or it may work for one child, but not the other.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is, you know your child better than anybody else.
Yeah.
And if you take the time to calm down and check in with yourself and really, like, ask the Holy Spirit to show you, or just ask the child what they need, you know, and I think that it's not a surefire win every time, but I think it will help a lot. It will help a lot.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times kids are acting out because they're just on sensory overload, and they just want a hug.
Yep.
Or, like, your kid is stalling going to school because they don't want to go to school. Well, why don't they want to go to school? Is it because something bad is happening at school, or is it because they just miss you?
Yeah.
And if they miss you, then they just need some extra reassurance that morning. And again, like, I'm saying all this stuff that I didn't do.
Yes.
Yeah, but that's it, right? I mean, and it does change, and it does shift, and kids and things happen, and then you have to switch gears.
Yeah.
Even so, and some of it is really counterintuitive, which I think is hard for us, especially if we're not willing to grow or learn. But, like, one of the things we've been doing lately, this is so dumb, but my wife is always doing this research on how to meet our daughter's needs the best way. And it's just like, she's constantly saying these things that are mind blowing. But one of them is, like, at the end of the night now, we turn on this YouTube video, and it's of the Toy Story characters. And you're just doing these dances with them. And then when Andy, the boy, walks in the room, they all drop, and you have to drop on the ground. But what it does is it seems counterintuitive, because she's getting riled up right before bed. And I'm like, so my brain tells me, no, this is not helping her go to sleep. Science says otherwise. She's getting all that energy out, and she's going to bed much easier. And so it's this dumb little practice that my wife found, by looking at the best ways to serve our daughter. And it was not something I ever would have thought of. And it's an easy 5-minute thing to do with her before bed. The whole family does now. We're all dancing like idiots around the house and falling down.
I want video. Pixar, it didn't happen.
That's awesome.
All right, I want to wrap this up with 2 final thoughts. One thought is, for those of you who've made it this far who are not parents, the key takeaway isn't about how great a parent or bad a parent you're going to be. The key takeaway is, how is it that God loves you into your future? If you can internalize that now, then it's a much easier translation into how you love your kids into their future. And so not only work on yourself, I mean, yes, for all the therapy and spiritual direction and all that, but there is another sense of the work that we're doing to really see what the character of God is like in Jesus. That's worthy work. And you know, inhabiting a reality where there is no condemnation, I mean, that's a big deal. The other thing, there's this great parable that no one ever talks about from Jesus, where he says, a master says to 2 servants, go and do this. One servant says no, and then he goes and does it. And another servant says yes, but then he doesn't do it. And then Jesus just simply says, which one did the will of the master? And so that, to me, speaks against the instant compliance that is the bedrock of that parenting style. And I mean, so much of Jesus's parables are about patience. You know, farmer scatters seed, and then he goes to bed and it grows. I mean, and if we, you know, the part I really want to deal with is the fear that sits behind all of our parenting. And if we can somehow get to a place where we're not parenting out of that, I think there's a lot of good that can be done, regardless of the style that you choose then about how you parent your kids. So
how you exist with your
Suzie,
kids, your neighbors, your enemies.
the whole thing.
Yeah.
The whole thing. If a community of love is at the center of the universe, and that community of love tells the truth and wants maturity and Christlikeness in the universe, and wants it so much that it refuses to use coercive power to achieve it, then we're off the hook. Then we're free to use that same kind of love in all of our significant relationships, trusting, man, God loves my kids. And I know this is all theory, but whatever. Suzie, last thought. Tim, last thought.
I totally agree with everything that you said. And I would like to also say that when you say you have to parent out of love and not fear, that's really, it's true, but it also is a process to get there. Like you have to get underneath your fear sometimes. And that might take you like a year of therapy or meeting with a spiritual director or something.
Or
like
50 years
so you
of
can't
life.
just like flip this. Yeah, like you can't just flip the switch and say, I'm being fearful, I need to be loving. Like sometimes like that fear is deep and you got to get underneath it. So
yeah, that's good.
I just want to say that.
Yeah. Thank you for adding that. I think that's really important. Tim Safford.
I have about 2 hours of last thoughts.
I have to go.
Okay. We love you, Suzie. Thank you.
I have to go.
Okay.
Love you too.
Thanks for your time
Bye.
today. See ya. You have about 2 hours of thoughts. Shocker.
Shocker
Con.
I would just tell people to have some grace for themselves. I think what Suzie just articulated when she was talking about her regret, in a lot of ways, was having grace for herself to repair some of those bridges. And I think that's phenomenal. I think that's like the best human work you can do, is to say, I may have missed the mark here, but I'm going to rectify, or I'm going to change course, or I'm going to whatever, however you want to metaphorize it.
Repair.
Yeah. I think that's huge for everybody.
Amen. All right. We're going to start a new series next episode, To Be Human. And we're going to look at like the human from Genesis 1 and 2 and all throughout the Bible, blah, 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 blah. It'll be great. Barbarian.
Blah, blah. Yeah, bar.
Anyway, I'm excited. My kids don't listen to this. Although my daughter said, hey, I'll listen to this when you die. So it'll be, hopefully it'll be, 1,000 episodes at that point or whatever. But I hope someday when they do hear this,
only 1,000. We're already halfway there.
We're halfway. Well, it's 9 years. Hopefully I got 9 more years in me.
I hope so.
That'd be nice.
Yeah.
That'd be funny. Yeah. All of a sudden our podcast topics would just be, okay, so how's your prostate?
Still there.
Yep. I'm peeing 8 times a night. How do you handle your ear hair? I don't know. It's just, Anyway, we love you all. Thanks.